Recently in the world of WWE, there were rumors that Sasha Banks quit not only after a major pay-per-view, but the major pay-per-view. There's far more to that story as ever, but it did seem likely that after WrestleMania 35, the legit boss was so disappointed with the way she was being treated, she told management she was done. What happens next is anybody's guess, and by the time you hear this, it could have been sorted out, but it's certainly nothing new. Plenty of performers over the years have felt so slighted by the company they get through a main event and then let everyone know they won't be seeing their face again. Within hours, the wrestling news sites are awash with headlines aplenty. I'm Simon from WhatCulture, remember to subscribe, and this is 8 wrestlers who quit after major pay-per-views. Number 8, Rick Rude at Survivor Series 97. A lot of wrestlers wanted to quit after the Montreal Screwjob, and it's easy to understand why. The whole idea of the industry is to trust both your fellow professionals and those pulling the strings, so when such foundations are broken, you have a serious problem on your hands. How can you trust the process anymore? Once the dust had settled though and Bret Hart made it clear to a lot of the locker room that they should worry about themselves first and foremost, the proposed backlash calmed down. That wasn't true for Rick Rude. He was so perplexed by what had happened, he called Eric Bischoff and got himself a job in WCW, leaving DX behind in the process. Because Raw was taped though, it meant on one Monday night a clean-shaven Rude turned up on Nitro as his moustache version was on the other channel. It was crazy and probably proof if you needed it that the fallout from Survivor Series 97 wasn't going to go away anytime soon. Hell, we're still here 22 years later and the conversation goes on. Rude used his promo time on Nitro to lay into the WWE, and that wasn't great in hindsight. He called Vince McMahon's operation a sinking ship. What actually happened was WWE used this incident to climb higher than they ever had before. Wrestling, eh? What a strange thing it is. Number 7, Mick Foley at Survivor Series 97. I said loads of dudes wanted to cut ties from WWE after all this craziness, and that's because I meant it. I wasn't lying. And again, many didn't do anything before being convinced to stay, but Mick Foley's story was a bit different as he actually had one foot out of the door. A good friend of Bret's thanks to a mutual love of the Civil War and a great respect for each other's ring work, Foley was so shocked at what happened to his pal he didn't go to Raw the following night because he was going to leave WWE altogether. It was done. As mentioned, the Hitman realized how bad that would be all round, especially as Foley had already served his time in World Championship Wrestling, and that going back there would probably be career suicide. Furthermore, the terms of Mick's contract would probably have seen him just trapped in limbo. Going through with this would have likely ended Foley's career, let alone his ties with WWE, so with Bret's blessing, he returned to his employer. As Foley himself said in his book, there was no animosity whatsoever. He was welcomed back with open arms by Vince McMahon, as Mick himself suspected that the boss may have actually respected his stand. He had done what was technically right, and ultimately there was no long-term ramifications in the sense of an entire walkout. Probably was best just to shake everybody's hand as quickly as possible and get back to business. Number 6, Bad News Brown at SummerSlam 1990. At WrestleMania 35, WWE crowned only the second African-American world champion in its history. That is problematic for many reasons. How on earth can that number still be so low? But if you were to turn the clock back almost 3 decades, Bad News Brown would claim he was meant to be the first. An absolute badass who was protected by the company right down to barely even losing against the biggest stars in the industry. He would go out with that old DQ finish instead. It seemed quite clear that Brown was being protected so he could have a match against Hulk Hogan. The Hulkster would have likely won given that he never lost back then, but these were the tea leaves, and it was a feud that would have felt different and exciting. Instead, by SummerSlam 1990, Bad News was put against Jake the Snake Roberts. Not the worst position on the card, but it's not really main eventing with Hogan from both a historic or financial perspective. Feeling like the wool had been pulled over his eyes and that he'd been fed a bunch of lies, Brown told McMahon he could take his job and shove it. He was off. Whether or not there was much blowback we don't know, but that was the end of Bad News at this point. If he was right, fair play to him. There would have been something in that. It's almost like the idea of WWE changing their minds on a whim isn't that new of a trend. Number 5, Hawk at SummerSlam 92. SummerSlam 1992 was really weird. After returning to the company, the Legion of Doom had been told that manager Paul Ellering would hold a ventriloquist dummy called Rocco in his arm, which I guess served as the unofficial mascot for the Road Warriors. It didn't fit their gimmick at all, and most people thought it was strange, and one of these individuals was Hawk, who was in the damn team. Now admittedly at the time, Hawk himself was not in the best place. He'd failed a drug test and gone AWOL from the WWE, claiming that he was done and wouldn't be coming back after after his match with Money Inc. at the Slams 92. He meant it as well because he did not come back till years later and instead used this time to join the Hells Angels to drive around London. Alrighty then. A few days later, Animal was told his partner had quit and Crush was drafted in to take his place. That was kind of ironic as he'd been part of Demolition, which was WWE's version of the Legion of Doom. You can't write this stuff. As we know, a few years later, Hawk would tragically pass away, but you can kind of see where he was coming from here. You're meant to be one of the most badass teams in the history of pro wrestling, and now the dude walking you to the ring is holding a puppet. And if you've seen any of those Bray Wyatt commercials recently, you understand why puppets are controversial at best when it comes to wrestling. Number 4, Hulk Hogan at Bash at the Beach. Every time we have to talk about this, my brain hurts and serves as a reminder why trying to swerve your audience at every opportunity is a terrible idea. You leave them drained and confused when most people just want to enjoy a wrestling show. Who'd have thunk it? Hulk Hogan's exit from WCW is even more crazy because he didn't quit after Bash at the Beach, he quit during the thing. By the summer of 2000, World Championship Wrestling was a mess and steaming towards going out of business. To try and save the day, Vince Russo had been drafted in, but as we know, that just made everything worse. Within weeks, the show was even more confusing than ever. Obsessed with work shoots or fiction masquerading as reality, one of his worst plans was executed at this pay-per-view when he wanted world title holder Jeff Jarrett to lay down for Hulk Hogan in protest at what had apparently happened behind the scenes. Hogan would then yell at Russo for all this nonsense, and that was meant to get the fans to tune in. Good one. All that did happen, but Vince wasn't done. As soon as Hulk had left the arena, he went on the offensive even though that actually hadn't been in the script. Well, that's what Hogan would tell you, but who the hell knows? Russo called the Hulkster a piece of shit and fired him live on air. He also vowed to never let him back in the company ever again. He was yelling the truth whether he knew it or not too. Hogan was so upset by this tirade he said he would never return to WCW, and he didn't. He even sued Russo for the whole stunt. Exhausting all this, isn't it? The hell were they thinking? Number 3, the Radicals at Sold Out 2000. Following on from that, you probably won't be surprised to hear that soon after this, Russo was gone from WCW, and hopefully to actually rebuild a wrestling company, wrestling-type people were brought in, specifically Kevin Sullivan, who took over booking duties. While this sounded better on paper, it caused yet more backstage issues as up-and-coming talent resented the decision. Sullivan wasn't known for pushing the new breed and would usually revert to the guys already established. This was no good. So, to make a huge point, as soon as this was greenlit, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero and Perry Saturn all handed in their notices. They weren't going to work under this guy no matter what. Sullivan did try and make assurances to this group that they would be in the mix, but they didn't buy it, especially Benoit. There was personal beef between the two as Chris and Sullivan's wife Nancy had been seeing each other behind his back, so to make all this work, something huge had to happen. The answer was the WCW Championship. Just to underline how bad that was, it wasn't enough. Even though Benoit did win the title at Sold Out 2000, he left the next day along with his 3 friends. Furthermore, they all turned up on Raw a week later, which was probably the right decision, all things considered. WCW was toast by this point, and clearly the Radicals, as they would become known, saw the writing on the wall. Also, doesn't that just highlight how pointless the WCW title was at this stage? Wasn't even enough to convince a wrestler that they may be treated the right way. Oh boy. Number 2, Jeff Jarrett at No Mercy 99. Unless you know the history, you won't get why WWE inducting Jeff Jarrett into the Hall of Fame in 2018 was so surprising. This was the guy Vince McMahon had fired as soon as he bought WCW, and he did it live on TV. Their relationship for a long time was awful, especially because it was Jeff Jarrett that started TNA. Even he knew it made more sense to start a brand new company rather than try and get back in with WWE. This all stemmed back to 1999, where he essentially held the company up for money. Halfway through a program with China, Jeff's contract finished and somehow nobody realized. That's a question within itself, and as Jarrett's friend Vince Russo had headed in the direction of WCW, he decided to go as well. Probably get a bigger push down south. Realizing he held all the cards and that he could leave, Jeff went into the pay-per-view with a plan. WWE would either pay him $300,000 that he felt like he was owed, or he wouldn't drop the Intercontinental title to China. With no way to refuse, McMahon agreed, and Jeff walked out 24 hours later, a much richer man. Vince hated him for it. Number 1, CM Punk at the Royal Rumble 2014. Here we are 5 years later, and arenas still chant CM Punk's name. Often done these days as some sort of protest against what's being booked on a particular evening. Who knows what brand new fans think? Probably sit watching the rest of the show waiting for this man called CM Punk. and then he never comes. If they do their research, they will find out that just one day after the Royal Rumble in 2014, Punk left the WWE saying he was done with it all, which kind of summed up that pay-per-view altogether. It was like one big ball of dissatisfaction from wrestlers to fans. Punk didn't arrive for Raw and SmackDown as McMahon told stockholders that the star was taking a sabbatical. As it turned out, it was just a sabbatical that never ended. Basically fed up with life in the company, Punk became the most high-profile wrestler since Steve Austin to just leave it all behind, citing a list of grievances, including not headlining WrestleMania 29, receiving inadequate medical attention, and the being known as Ryback. Punk would go on to try his hand at MMA, and while a lot of people slate him for it, I use it as a constant source of inspiration. If you want to do something, do it, no matter what the end result may be, or what anybody else may say. That, my friends, is frickin' badass. Know of any other wrestlers who quit after major pay-per-views? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then head over to WhatCulture.com and read yourself some articles, and follow WhatCulture on Twitter at WhatCulture WWE. My name is Simon from WhatCulture, and I will talk to you again soon.